Hey everyone, Warwick's here. So we did the Guardian Druid tree, kind of a deep dive, kind of messing around with a build that I think might potentially be somewhat good. So now we're going to do the same now for the Feral Druid tree. So for anyone unaware, Wowhead has now made a clickable tree, and so that's where we're going to be now moving forward, going through with when we make these trees, and as we go through them for Feral, Restoration, and then I'll be doing DK trees as well. So what I'm basically going to do in this video is basically sit down and create a build that I think might be interesting based on what we know now. Now, of course, because these are not even technically in alpha yet, or they're only in an employee-only alpha, obviously all of this is going to be subject to change. Numbers are going to get tweaked. Talents might get shifted around and stuff like that. And if things like that happen throughout alpha and beta, which fingers crossed I'm getting in, then we'll obviously be doing update videos for Death Knight, Druid, and Monk. Those are kind of the three classes that I have front and center in my mind to be playing in Shadowlands. Evokers obviously on the list as well, because new class, everyone's going to check it out. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop down the Druid tree side first and then go into the Feral tree. Now, I'm primarily going to be thinking about this from a Mythic Plus perspective, but if there's good raid choices somewhere that I think are going to be very valuable and very useful, then we will definitely talk about those as well. And then we'll also kind of give my opinion on these trees, as I've done a lot more like digging into them, and more off of first impressions now. I'm really kind of thinking about like the consequences of the trees. So of course, as a Feral specialization, you get Rake and Thrash right away by default, so no need to spend points there. Of course, we're going to get Rip because that's going to be the primary finishing move that you use, and Swipe, along with the increased armor and physical damage dealt increase. Go from there. Now, we need 8 points required to get down to this row right here. We only have 5 spent right now, so we have to make a choice. Now, traditionally, this is kind of where you would make a choice. Honestly, it's where your affinity comes in. But I want the utility right off the start, so I'm going to go ahead and grab these 3 right here, just to open up the last of the tree and remove corruption to help with curse and poison effects in dungeons where they, or in raid situations where they are going to be quite nasty. Think Halls of Atonement curses, diseases, and plaguefall, that sort of thing. All right, moving down, of course, we get Skull Bash, and we're going to go ahead and take Wild Charge. Tiger's Dash, if you prefer that playstyle, I know some of you do. Definitely going to be there. And we'll go ahead and get the Feline Swiftness. Tireless Pursuit, which is a conduit right now, I'm not going to take for now because I think it's kind of limiting to the tree. It's good for like open world and leveling, but I don't think it's something that you would want to take in endgame PvE content, which is where my builds are focused. Of course, we'll grab Soothe because, we want to have Soothe. Raging is probably still going to be a thing next expansion, so we want to be able to soothe that off. We'll go ahead and grab Primal Fury as well, just because you want that chance to generate that extra combo point. Make sure generating ability is a lot easier to, a lot more energy efficient when they crit. Along those lines, and then we'll grab Stampeding Roar. Now you can see here again, we have 20 points required. We've only spent 15. So we have a few choices here. We can jump in and grab some defensive choices with Iron Fur, Thick Hide, and then Ursoc's Endurance to give you a little bit of an absorb on Bark Skin and Survival Instincts, which we do take in the Feral tree. We can come down and grab Healing Taken, which is going to help your regrowths on yourself if you're using Predatory Swiftness on yourself. And it just allows you to be a little bit less of a mana sponge into Wild Growth, which would help there. That's 3 more points to get us to 8, or to get us to 18 plus 2 somewhere else. We can also take Improved Bark Skin into getting that extra duration. Depending on what you're using Bark Skin for, that may or may not be useful as Feral. It's extremely important as Bear, in my opinion. But for Feral, Bark Skin, you're usually only trying to survive like 1 hit or like a short cast, like the Thrash cast in Halls, for example. So I don't think this is going to be as useful. What I am going to do is grab these 3 right here, which opens up Astral Influence. So we're at 18 points spent there. And I'm going to go ahead and grab Astral Influence to give us that extra 3 yards on all of our abilities. Something that Feral is kind of been dealing with for a long time. We've been taking Balance Affinity for a long time now, so this allows Astral Influence to open up. Now this does open up further down the tree. I'm going to go ahead and grab Mighty Bash to give more single target utility. You can grab In-Cap Roar, but you do have to shift into bear form in order to do it. So again, its usefulness may vary to you. And then we're going to go ahead and grab Lucaris Teachings and the reduction on Stampeding Roar, just to give, again, more of that utility. So at this point, we have 6 points left to spend, and this is kind of where you can make the decision on how you want to spend them. You can grab Well-Honed Instincts to give you another defensive tool. You can come down and grab Typhoon to give you more mob control. You can get Hibernate if there's like a beast-heavy dungeon. Obviously, we don't know if that's going to be useful, so like that's a point that could be spent with Beast and Dragonkin. Obviously, a dungeon an expansion that's set on the Dragon Isles, Hibernate might actually be a fairly important CC tool. If there's certain really nasty Dragonkin mobs, then Hibernate's going to be a good way to kind of set them off from the rest of the pack. Typhoon obviously does what it does, interrupts casting, slows, things of that nature. I'm going to go ahead and grab Sunfire and just grab Sunfire just so that I can go grab Ursols for the time being. Now we have 4 points left to spend, and this is where the choices I think get very, very interesting. Now for Mythic Plus scenarios, I would probably look at something like Well-Honed Instincts, maybe into Fure, depending on dungeon design, where you can get that early burst damage, no energy costs. So you could go this build here, grab 3 points out of the 4 that you need there, and then maybe pop one into Typhoon to give you that utility. For raid situations, you could run Innervate into Nature's Vigil to give you a little bit of off-healing potential and utility for your healers, particularly those mana-hungry healers. A Mistweaver Monk, Holy Priest can sometimes be fairly mana-hungry. Disciplined Priest can be sometimes mana-hungry, and go from there. So I think the bottom part of this Druid tree for Feral has some really interesting options on the table. So from a Mythic Plus standpoint, I'm going to go ahead and grab Well-Honed Instincts into Typhoon, and then also throw 1 point here into improved Bark Skin. Now, obviously, Innervate is an option in Mythic Plus as well, depending on things like the seasonal affix. What does that look like? It doesn't give mana regen like does for healers now. Or are we looking at something like Pride, where healers are going to be on Pride and then get the regeneration after? So we just don't know what that's going to look like from a mana perspective. So if there's not much in the way of mana regen, then you could drop the point out of improved Bark Skin into Innervate. Renewal is also an option if you're like constantly pugging and you're worried about the healer kind of being able to keep up. This is a way to take a little stress off your healer. You can grab that 30% max health burst, and again, you could also pull a point out of improved Bark Skin into Hibernate. You can throw it into Maim if you want the single target stun for like an inspired mob, for example. Think of like the Houndmasters and Halls, where you want to stop the Loyal Beast cast. You can't traditionally interrupt it, so you have to use some sort of stun. So Maim, Bash, Typhoon gives you 3 ways to do that. If there's any mobs like that coming in Dragonflight. So for Feral, I think this side of the tree is very flexible. Actually, what I'm going to do is move it here to improve Sunfire. So you can go in Sunfire, drop into cat form, go from there, or you know, if you're looking to Aloeave a little bit, or you're forced away from a boss for any particular reason, this gives you at least some tools with Wrath, Starfire, Star Surge, Sunfire, and Moonfire to kind of do the basics of the Moonkin rotation. Obviously, no empowerments through Eclipse. Excuse me. Apologies there. Obviously, no empowerments through Eclipse, but you know, it is something that's going to be potentially useful for you. I'm gonna grab my water real quick. I'll cut this out. Or maybe I won't, because I'm that type of person. So I think the Druid class tree itself is really nice. I think it gives some really good options for how you want to dictate your playstyle. If you don't want to do the more Moonkin stuff and you are willing to skip Astral Influence, Typhoon, and you know, the Sunfire talents, you can drop down here and grab the Healing Taking, grab Wild Growth into Ursols, into these final 2 talents, which I think are the 2 best in the entire tree. You can do more of a resto off-healing type situation, where if you're forced off the boss, you can pop out, throw a Wild Growth, maybe a couple of rejuves, you know, throw a few heals out, you know, just to kind of help with the off-healing side of things. You know, or you can go full bear if you want to go defensive and grab Iron for a Thick Hide into Ursoc's Endurance. And that'll allow you to have you know, be really tanky, so to speak, on like the defensive side of the tree. So I think all three options and all three potential paths have viability. For me, this is the one I think will bring the most pure damage output. But, you know, depending on the situation you find yourself in, for example, progression rating, you might want to take some of the more defensive tools, depending on the fight design. You know, Mythic Plus, there is, you know, potential that the healing spells may be more useful depending on what's going on in the dungeon, things of that nature. So I really like the flexibility of the Druid tree for Feral specifically. I think it just provides a lot of good flavor to the spec itself, and you can pick up some really interesting utility as you go down the tree and things of that nature. So generally speaking, this is what I think I'd do for Mythic Plus. For Raid, I'd probably drop the 2 points out of Well-Honed Instincts and maybe out of Improved Sunfire to go into Innervate and Nature's Vigil. Nature's Vigil, I think, is going to be good on a style of fights, for example, like Lords of Dread, where there's just huge damage being taken in one particular phase. You pop Nature's Vigil, you know, that's an empowered phase. You know, a lot of guilds with Hero, the first Swarm, for example, and you're getting 40% of the damage done by your direct single target spell done as healing to nearby allies. So you can just kind of help with the off healing. You know, so you're talking Shred, Rake, Ferocious Bite, you know, Brutal Slash could technically do it if it's on a single target, even though it cleaves. You know, so you're talking some of your biggest hitting abilities can also provide, and you know, you get those really, really juicy Ferocious Bites. Then, you know, obviously if you do 10,000 damage on a Ferocious Bite, that's, you know, 4,000 healing that's coming off of that to someone else, and for some folks that's, you know, a decent chunk of their health bar. So there is flexibility in this tree. Again, I think for Mythic Plus, based on what I know, I'd probably go this route, but for rating situations, I'm probably pulling 2 points out of Well-Honed Instincts and going down into Innervate Nature's Vigil. It might even, instead of going down this side of the tree, might come down here and grab more defensive stuff just to make sure that I'm living as long as possible while we're learning the fight. Once we're on farm, yeah, switch to the Owl Weaving or grab the healing stuff, whatever the case may be. But enough rant about the Druid tree. 12 minutes into this video, 12 and a half minutes into this video, and we haven't even looked at the other side. So let's look at the Feral tree. So of course we're going to take Tiger's Fury, and we're going to take the energy generation that it gives. Really, we're only required to get Moment of Clarity to come down. Increased energy, I'm going to skip for the time being because I don't think it's totally necessary with some of the other synergies that are built into the tree. We are going to get Improved Shred to get that extra combo point off Shred, and it opens up this side of the tree for us, so kind of necessary, because Improved Prowl is going to be good because this gives the 30% rake damage. So you kind of have to take this talent point, which is kind of useless. You maybe only use it in world content, maybe, and even then I usually lead with rake to get the stun to kind of reduce the amount of damage I take. So I kind of hate that this is here. I'd maybe like to see these two talents combined, where Shred and then Prowl both get kind of the damage bonuses of each and just make it one talent, and then find something interesting to put here. But you know, you'll notice a pattern with this Feral tree, at least in my view. Scent of Blood is trash. I freaking hate this talent. I can't understand why they are trying to make this happen. It's like Fetch. Stop trying to make Fetch happen. Stop trying to make Scent of Blood happen, Blizzard. Please, please, please. All right, and then our first choice node, both of these talents are very good. Predator, I think, would be more, generally speaking, it's more situated to Mythic Plus. Sabretooth, more situated to Raids. So you just kind of pick the talent based on the content that you're doing. So again, my primary focus is Mythic Plus, so I'm grabbing Predator, and then we'll go ahead and grab Improve Shred and Swipe, which deals more damage against bleeding targets. So that opens us up down now below the 8 points because we spent 10 total in the tree. We are going to go ahead and grab Sudden Ambush to give you a small chance to have your Rake or Shred deal damage as though we were stealthed. I'm sure that's a proc that could be tracked through WeakOre packages and things of that nature. We're also going to go ahead and grab Relentless, Berserk Relentless, just to get a chance to refund those combo points. And we're going to go ahead and get Taste for Blood to make your Ferocious Bites even juicier. Next row down, we're going to go ahead and grab Primal Wrath and Brutal Slash. Brutal Slash replaces Swipe, so it gives you, and it's much less energy. I think it's like 20 versus 30 or 35 energy. So it's a much more energy efficient combo point generator, one that you would use quite a bit. In the current talent incarnation, you have to choose between these two. You basically take Primal Wrath for AoE, Brutal Slash for single target. Now you can have the benefits of both, which I think is one of the bonuses of this tree design for Feral, because both of these abilities just do a lot of works for the spec. And this is kind of where, for me, the tree starts to get really muddy, and I think a lot of things are not placed well. So we're going to go ahead and grab Survival Instincts, and we'll grab Predatory Swiftness. I think those are no doubt. Infected Wounds, giving a 20% movement reduction speed. I am not as sold as this being this deep down the tree. I don't think it's always necessary. Some of it will depend on group comp, but really the only weak you need a slow is Necrotic and maybe some Bolstering and Raging, but you can soothe mobs that are raging, so even that's less useful. And Bolstering, with its bevy of nerfs that it's taken over the course of this expansion, is not nearly as scary an affix as it used to be. So for me, Infected Wounds doesn't feel like it's Infected Wounds doesn't feel like it's well placed in this tree at all. I think it's just kind of going, and the fact that it's the only way to get straight down into Eye of Fearful Symmetry and then Convoke, like, I think this is a really poor talent to be in this place. If you swapped it with like Taste for Blood or even Primal Wrath, and I think now we're onto something, because then I could skip Infected Wounds here, even though if it's, I could take Infected Wounds simply to go get Predatory Swiftness, and then Carnivorous Instinct, which is a current talent because I need Blood Talons. Like that, this to me is like the end of this side of the tree, which means we're going to spend a lot more focus on these, because Adaptive Swarm, there is a Necrocat build out there right now. The Bees build is sometimes called, that does work. I don't know why this is all question marks, but I don't think Adaptive Swarm is something that you want to go into first without sacrifice, because you sacrifice some other things that you could potentially look at. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab Berserk Frenzy, because this is basically the Frenzy Band legendary baked into your Berserk. Frenzy Band is, good generic legendary for Feral now, so I think it makes sense for this to carry over. So very nice. And then there's Cat Eye Curio. Killer cast abilities generate 30% of their energy costs, so on a 40 rage shred, 30% of that is going to be 12 energy. Now you could go grab Moment of Clarity, giving you the extra damages on your builders, getting the extra charge, but for now I'm skipping that. I'm also going to go ahead and grab Soul of the Forest, because I think this is very integral to the spec working. That's why also you could see it's moved up here into the Infected Wound spot. Maybe move Infected Wounds to something off of like Berserk Relentless or Taste for Blood. I mean, hell, I'd even take Savage Roar in this place. Force me to get Savage Roar in order to play something like Incarn or Convoke. Like, I'd be more okay with that than Infected Wounds being here. And then from here, you have some choices. We have 2 points left to spend. As you can see, with the way this build is setting up, we're not going to get Convoke. So you can choose either between your single target / AoE choice node, single target drop to defocus, AoE for Apex Predator's Craving, and then you can grab Circle of Life and Death to give you that. So this build is one I think I would probably lean towards more. Just because, again, I think Infected Wounds is so badly placed, and even Eye of Fearful Symmetry, I don't really care. It doesn't feel like that's something that should be this far down in the tree. For me, the biggest problem with the Feral tree is these last 3 rows. They all feel underwhelming, because they're just like stuff that feels lackluster, or you're getting what I think are bad options behind stuff that would be really good options. Like, I would love to continue to have Convoke. I think it's very, very integral to Feral, being even somewhat decent in the single target situations that it is now, although the lack of Celestial Spirits does hurt the spec quite a bit. But like, these 2 talents in particular are just really bad. Berserk Jungle Stalker doesn't feel really nice. Adaptive Swarm being in this tree to me makes no sense. Yeah, it's another dot that enhances your bleeds on top of your mastery already, but I just don't feel like this is something that is totally necessary for Feral. I think there are a lot more interesting options that we could put here. The biggest one being maybe shift Convoke over into these 2 spots here. Then all of a sudden, maybe I don't take Cat's Eye and Apex Predator's Craving. I take these 3 points and can move them into, Convoke, and then the improved Convoke, which gives you increased chance to get Feral Frenzy. Uh, Savage Roar kind of being out here, I think, is something that is not the greatest. I think Savage Roar does have a place in the Feral rotation, uh, and I think it's one that should probably be more central to the tree and feel less like an option, because that's what happens with these talents out here on the side is they feel incredibly optional. Uh, I'd like to maybe see Savage Roar come down in the middle of this tree and maybe work with Convoke. So overall, the Feral tree itself, it feels kind of disappointing. I'm just not satisfied with its current state. So I'm hoping that, if anyone from Blizzard watches this that is working on the Dragonflight Talent system, maybe you take a look and maybe take a second lens to look at this and see what we can do. Because like this middle of the tree just gets so restrictive that the choices aren't there anymore. And you lose out on so many other things that are fun and interesting to the spec of Feral that, if you go down the Convoke route, you can't get Blood Talents, you can't get Circle of Life and Death. I don't even think you can get Solo the Forest. And to me, that doesn't feel good. Like, we can get all of these things now. Like, we can get Convoke, Solo the Forest, and Blood Talents. I understand that there's this idea of choice that needs to be implemented into the game and like these playstyle differences and things of that nature. But like, this just doesn't feel good. Like, it doesn't feel good to have to skip on something that's really cool and fun and flavorful like Convoke because you feel like you have to get Solo the Forest because it is your energy regeneration tool. And you can get Blood Talents. Now, some people would be like, oh, just grab Savage Roar instead of Solo the Forest. Like, if I want high energy regen outside of Berserk, I should be able to do that. And Solo the Forest combined with Savage Roar would offer a really fun and interesting option and add a layer of complexity to Feral that, isn't really there. A lot of people think Feral is hard to play. I mean, Feral is essentially a substandard assassination rogue. Assassination rogue, your goal is to get Rupture, Corrode, and then your poisons on your target, and then you spend everything on Envenom, after you slice and dice once. Feral Druid, you're getting Rip and Rake up on as many targets as possible. Maybe you do a Thrash in AoE situations, and then you Ferocious Bite, which is basically Envenom with a little bit of a twist with the energy storing. Like, the two specs play very, very similar to each other. The biggest difference between Rogue and Druid is everything else that they bring to the table, or Assassination Rogue and Druid. Assassination Rogue does have some control, it has threat drop with Vanish, can Shroud, things of that nature, but like Druid brings a lot of other interesting utility to the table, things like good mob control with Mighty Bash and Skull Bash and Ursols and Typhoon, and you bring group mobility in the form of Stampeding Roar. Good mobility in Wild Charge and Travel Form and things of that nature. So, but the two specs essentially are the same thing, just with different coats of paint on them. And so this tree doesn't do anything to really set aside those differences, and I'd like to see it do something that's unique to Feral. Does it focus a lot more on a bleed heavy build? Do you make Thrash worth casting a lot and therefore you now have to do something that manages 3 bleeds? Or do you try to lean into a heavy Ferocious Bite build where the bleeds are a lot more secondary? Like, there's options in this tree. I just don't think that they're really doing a great job with this initial hit to be able to kind of smack down on that foundation. I don't want to necessarily just completely bash on Feral as a spec. It's a spec that I would love to be able to play as a main. Just as a tank guy, I'd probably be playing Bear first, and then, the only time I'd maybe be playing Feral would possibly be in raid situations. But even then, like, even last night, I was on my Monk and I was Windwalker instead of Brewmaster because of the needs of the group. We had a prop pally main. We were running some 20s, and so I switched to Windwalker and, didn't do bad. I don't think I did great, but, I'd love to be able to do the same if Druid was my main. I'll play Bear primarily, absolutely, if it's good. But, right now I'm a DPS / backup tank in raid, so if, I would have Feral prepped for raid, and I could have Bear prepped for Mythic Plus. Even use Feral and Mythic Plus if I'm running with another tank main that wants to tank a dungeon. So, like, I like having that flexibility, but right now this tree kind of makes it so that it's hard to justify the idea of being Druid main. The Guardian tree, like I said in that video, I think is actually not that bad at all. This tree just feels very underwhelming compared to what the potential of the spec could be. So not to end on a particularly sour note with the tree, I'm a little disappointed in the tree itself for Feral, but on a positive note, I think the Druid class tree is very, very good for Feral in particular, but really for 3 of the 4 specs that I have knowledge about, spoilers for the rest of the video, I really like the Druid class tree, and that I will commend Blizzard on because I think this tree has some really interesting choices and options in it that don't feel like you're losing anything essential out of it. It's just matters of flavor. You get all the required stuff for Feral, for example, with Rake, Maul Swipe, Skull Bash, Feline Swiftness, Primal Fury, Stampeding Roar with the cooldown. You get Lucaris, which is a very fun, well, I don't say fun, it's a flat increase to crit, but it's a good way to boost the spec in a way that is unique because it's not the same all the time. You spend most of your time in cat form, but if you're out in no form, you get a little bit of extra haste. 3% haste makes like a wild growth cast or a regrowth cast a little bit faster. Or if you have to shift into bear form, you get that little bit of extra burst to potentially help you soak a little more damage. So like Lucaris, I think, is a cool way to kind of add that flavor to the Druid class. And then things like getting Wild Charge and Renewal potentially are like very, very good. So like the class tree just offers really good flavors and really fun choices in how you play your Druid outside of your main spec. The Feral tree doesn't do that. It basically, I feel like, forces you into some very pigeonholed choices that doesn't allow for fun experimentation. And so I hope that there's more done with this tree to kind of like tweak and tune and make some things a little bit more integral. Obviously, there's going to be some other things with class changes, and as top level Ferals get into alpha/beta and are able to start giving feedback on what's going on there, maybe some things will change. So fingers crossed this is not what we end up with. I kind of doubt that it will be, but early on at least, this tree is one that I think definitely needs some work on it. So Restoration Druid is going to be coming up next. So until the next video, I hope you're all staying safe. I hope you're having fun. You keep gaming, and I'll see you all in the next video.